so the time to think differently is there. And then, these are 3 points that I was trying to make. And then I talked also about the problem with the fear and the vigilante technique. That the fear is based on something which is not really what's happening. That's something that I was talking about. And so from that point of view, I was saying that the need to keep Mexican studies on, the need to have that kind of input into our primary, secondary, tertiary, and post-tertiary education is not identitarianism nor a takeover that should provoke fear, but the very useful shift, and this you may want to discuss because I had some input after the lecture and I don't think I made myself clear, or it's too complex a topic to make clear too quickly. A shift from the performative to performance into a new general performative. That was point 5, if you like. And the thing that I was also trying to deal with was the need to broaden the focus of what's happening in this really terrifying situation regarding border. That's why we're perhaps a bit late, because we were there. And see, let me tell you, we were in Nogales, let me tell you one little fieldwork item that's already taught me something. Now, I'm a green card holder, right? And I've been one now for many years. But in New York State, we keep our green cards, we aliens, keep our green card in a safe place so it doesn't get lost. Whereas in this state, you carry it on you. This is why I wasn't carrying my green card. I'm within the United States. I know everything about Arizona. Now I know even more because I was preparing for this visit. But that internal habit, it needs to be globalized. You see, even within this country, it's different. So, and therefore, that was one of my attempts. And Javier was telling me that I was moving in that direction because we did a little bit of analysis after, and he was saying that yes, I'm not there yet, but that I was indeed moving in that direction. And I'm going to close now with one, this is all right. I know we don't want anything a long time. Yeah. I think questions would probably be better. I think what I would like to mention is, as we were coming, we were talking about border studies. Yeah? This is once again, since this need to put in a broader context. I mentioned Edward Said and Congress Bill and so on and so forth. This is very, very important, right? So we're talking about border studies. Now, I was in Africa, as I was saying, 5 different universities trying to do something consortial. There's a fantastic border studies crowd at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. Now, if Africa doesn't know about borders, nobody knows it. I mean, the imperialism established borders there that were completely irrational, so that you have this huge Congo and this tiny little Gambia, because they decided to go across ethnic lines, across language lines, and just establish borders, and some completely landlocked, and so on and so forth. So, to an extent, I was thinking, as we were talking, coming back, how extraordinary it would be if this situation, which is getting aggravated more and more, and that situation, which carries a tremendous historical burden as well, if they could start talking to each other and learning more about the global, so that if something happens, this was something. And the final, I thought this would be the final thing, but another item that I want to mention, and came up in conversation, I think is worth mentioning, because one of the points that I was trying to make yesterday was that although electoral politics alone are not enough anymore, to give up on electoral politics is a signal mistake. You have a good congressman in this area, and that's a very, very important thing. So I was suggesting that what we need is not just the electoral system, but an educated electorate, educated into, this is what requires humanities education, will for social justice for all, not just self-interest for my group. This connects with the identitarian thing. Now, in this area, because then you cannot be taken in by campaign rhetoric as well as capitalist rhetoric. That's what I was talking about. And the campaign rhetoric business, I did not mention this yesterday. If any of you want to get a theoretical description of this, which is by now rather old, but nonetheless it's good, that's Baudrillard. Baudrillard, hyperreal. The campaign rhetoric is completely hyperreal. So to an extent, to undermine that, rather than just simply to apply it and produce stockpiles of dissertations saying it is hyperreal, that's a useless use of theory. To undermine that, it is this educated electorate that I was talking about. From that point of view, this is the vigilante stuff, Javier, that we were talking about. It is true, I believe, this is very recent research by way of conversation, find esoteric source. So, therefore, don't blame me. But it is true that the actual vigilante stuff in this state is going down. This is what I was told by people who know. But what the thing that really is terrifying is when states become, the states legitimize violence. That's the scary thing, right? Now, there is such a thing, and this is something that I've been writing about for a very, very long time. I can even tell a joke here. This is called epistemic violence, right? When I was doing basically a job talk in Pittsburgh, in 1985, maybe, there were deans, and I'm using the phrase epistemic violence. And so, in my Q&A, the dean says, I didn't, you use all these difficult phrases, and it's hard for, and job talking, so it's hard for us to understand. So I said to the dean, how I ever got that Mellon professorship, nobody knows. I said to the dean, okay, ideological production is brainwashing. Epistemic violence is mindfuck. Now, did you want to, there is no middle level word for this. Either I say epistemic violence or I say mindfucking. Which one would you have liked to say all through my talk? It was silent. It is a joke. So the epistemic violence, when, this is why we're 1070, am I right? Okay. Now, when that, in New York, we have a legitimized vigilante culture, the formula being, if you see something, say something. See, say, vigilante. So what happens is that all of the gun-toting illegal vigilantism, against which one can take a stand if the law is working, is gone, or almost all of it is gone. But what is getting legitimized, even for children, is the development of a low-grade vigilantism. If you see something, say something, report on other people and so on, which becomes normality. And slowly, as people grow up, this changes the entire culture of fear, culture of reporting, and this, to us, is epistemic violence and legitimized vigilantism, which cannot be recognized. That's so low-grade racism. you know, my mom, as I mentioned yesterday, had a US passport. Just for fun, I will say to my real lefty radical friends, my mother was American, they will say over and over again, you know, Rainbow Coalition, Global America, this, that, okay? But when I utter this word, something like 100% of the time, something like, oh, that's why you're so tall and your shoulders are so broad, etc., comes out. Because they actually think that to say American means white, Euro-American. So to an extent, what comes inside the mind, like see something, say something, that becomes an unbelievable kind of low-grade general vigilantism, which is epistemic violence, destroying the whole culture, because children learn that to be a good citizen is to do this. So therefore, that's to an extent the summary of what I more or less said yesterday with 2 points added. I think that should be okay for questions, because if I go on talking more, I think the discussion is a bit.
I just want you to add, if you could, just a quick reaction from what you saw in terms of the space.
Yes,
because I think it's.
I don't think I'm going to say anything unexpected or new. The what I was looking at is a war. What I was looking at are lines. What I was looking at is the way in which people look at people. And when in fact we were approaching the actual border, the four of us, it was immediately perceptible that the reaction time was very, very quick. So you know that there was something in us, a small group, approaching that that troubled. Now I had a thing. I had only a digital version of my green card, which I had my secretary emailed from New York, both sides. Now we knew that that wouldn't pass. In the past, it has passed. When my green card was stolen in Singapore, I was under house arrest for one night in Seoul, but then I was able to come through with something. It wasn't digital, then it was a faxed copy from my New York office, but that was different. This is different. And to an extent, again, the difference between other places inside the US and this situation was that, generally speaking, inside the US, not at this border, if you say things like property, tax, and so on, if you speak in a certain way, because I know I'm constantly within secondary checking when I'm entering in the Homeland Security offices. This is, you say you're a property owner, you're a taxpayer, you're a university professor, you're a this, that, and you speak in this accent. You are, people look differently, not here. This is something, this was so clear, because I was being my kind of sassy New York self. No, that was, it was okay, they were fine. But that's something that I also, they're not giving. So this I saw. What else did I see? I felt, and because I after all of this experience, I remain, and I want to remain, the kind of innocent who loves something like literature, which is neither rational nor irrational, shouldn't make any truth claims. So I felt, as I must always feel, that the soil is the same. Javier said that the air is the same. The air no one can touch, except that it can be polluted, but pollution travels. But the soil, to an extent, for someone like me, it means a little something more, that you cross a little space and it becomes criminal. This is something that people like me, who are into something as stupid and silly as literature, even poetry, this is something that strikes one. We are all on holiday in the world. And on the other hand, these are things that we have ourselves made. I'm sorry to speak in this way, which is completely apolitical, etc. But this will this still remains for someone who is not. I am indeed an activist, and I'm proud to say so. I've been one since 1957. But on the other hand, the love of literature comes packaged with it, and to an extent, this idea that you actually change minds for a general will to social justice, general will to justice. It is just that there be law, but law is not justice. We must fight hard for good laws, but laws can be revised. Justice cannot be revised. Justice is not something we can think about, but we must do whatever we do in view of it. This comes from this love of literature. Because something that cannot be really grasped, a correct verdict is not justice. Colloquially you say justice was done, but that's not literature. Literature uses language in a different way. Even if it is using slang, it's using it in a different way. So to an extent, I mean, that kind of use travels, it's like a time bomb. So therefore, this idea comes from the core thing of the humanities, which is literature and philosophy, but even philosophy must think about truth. Literature can think about nothing but training the mind for the ethical reflex. It's not, it's that thing is what that makes one feel the soil is the same, even if it's impractical, apolitical, whatever. That's at the base. So, to an extent, that's what ordered my response today in Novalis. And what else should I say? Did I say anything more there that struck you? No, I think this is generally speaking what I felt. I took some photos. I asked, I don't have a camera for reasons that I can go into. I don't even have a video, but I asked that I be photographed near the most intractable part of the wall as it climbs up like this, because I want the students at the Institute for Comparative Literature Society to see, because I put pictures on the web wherever I go. I come back and take photos of that picture in Tarragona and there in Kosovo. It's nice for the students to see this, and so that's also something that I want them to see this, and maybe there will be more discussion. Maybe I will have thought more. So I feel also many other border thoughts. I felt when one sees the wall, one thinks, of course, everybody does, of the wall in West Asia. And then I thought also of the fact that I come from a country that was divided when I was 5 years old. And so, which is part of my own area, right? I'm from West Bengal, so what is East Bengal? East Bengal is East Pakistan, it became Bangladesh and so on. So that I told a few stories about that frontier. I mean, I don't want to waste your time with me just telling stories, but I will tell you that I want much more to hear what questions you have. But this story is like this. I was crossing from Bangladesh into India by train, which cost, normally we fly. It's a different kind of frontier. It's 20 minutes in the air, but nonetheless, it's a different kind of frontier. But at this time, I was coming by train, and it cost 75 cents in American money. And it was like a real subaltern train. Okay, so waiting for everything, only third class, etc. And so many smugglers cross, etc. So there's really no person's land. The British laid the track, but you can't use the track anymore. So you only have to walk. So I'm walking along, and I see something in front of me, a tiny little piece of wood in the ground, and it's all broken, brown in color. In yellow, I can see it now. In yellow, it is written in Bengali, Bharat, India. So then I look back like this, and I see that there's a totally bleached kind of blue thing which says Ganaprajatantri Bangladesh. That is to say, the Republic of Bangladesh, the People's Republic of Bangladesh. Okay, so, and in between, of course, is no, is nothing. It's just land and a railway track that's not used. So I was thinking, you know, people when I was 5 years old put the little tapes here and decided, the surveyors, that this is how they were going to make it. And I don't think there's anybody here who has read that short story by Manto, Toba Texing. Anybody here? No. Well, I told Javier about the short story last night, and I would very much like, this is also broadening, like talking about borders. I mean, it still makes my throat catch. I haven't read the story about borders that's as powerful, or even in translation. They don't do it, but it's a fantastic story. It's by Manto is his last name, M-A-N-T is the Tom O. It's available, I think it's even in other ways. But, and the name of, I think the name of the story in English is simply the name of that village, Toba Texing, T-O-P-A, second word T-E-K, to the last word is sing, right? So I thought about all of those border experiences, and another thing that I thought about, my friends photographed me at the turnstile as I was looking at things. And I remember that my friend Kofi Amido in Ghana, just a few months ago, in October, photographed me. He was also my former student at Texas, very, very famous Ghanaian poet now. He insisted that he photograph his old teacher at the two doors of no return, the two castles where the slaves went out onto the new passage. And I felt very much that, you know, these younger colleagues, friends, former students who photographed me, I'm a very fortunate person. I mean, I'm the child of extraordinary, plain living, high-thinking, anti-casteist, anti-communal, nationalist, but not identitarian, super intellectual, very simple, non-westernized. I mean, I have had a life of absolute blessings. So for me, even to stand in those places seems to me like some kind of transgression. I really have not had my share of misfortune. Well, death is coming soon, but death is not a misfortune. Death is an end to a life. So at any rate, I really did feel that when we took my photograph, and I was thinking about Kofi insisting that he stand. So that's also something. Otherwise, I mean, if I really started talking, there would be many, many things crowding in my memory. But I think I would rather end here, just reminding you so that this the final thing was so narrative. Performative photodiction of character, non-identitarianism, changing performative to performance. These things, vigilantism becoming legitimized state epistemic violence. These are some of the things that one could also talk about, not just what I said last, which invariably becomes the thing. So, but what I would like, actually, let's see, yes. So, and then we're done.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all this. I always appreciate some detailed stories, mysteries, so thank you. I guess the question I wanted to ask you picked up on the borderless world that's being rebordered nonetheless, and in regard to citizenship. So it sounds kind of abstract, but it's also really very much here, as you know yourself. I've been listening to lots of talk about cosmopolitan citizenship, cultural citizenship. All those things are really important, but what bothers me is they don't seem to come to Elizabeth Hannah's point, which is citizenship as a legal status has to go to the nation state. And nation
then it's easier. I tend to give very long answers, but if I have 3, I will not do so. So, Miranda, you want to go?
Sure. I guess I wanted to invite you to talk about the relationship between 2 of your main points last night. The point about the shifting from performative to performance, and what you said just now was then into a new general performative. So to expand that a little bit, make sure we get what you're saying. But how that is not about identitarianism and actually allows for the focus on capitalism that you're, I think, urging us to pay attention to in thinking about the performative contradictions around borders and capital flow.
Okay, and is there another question from someone? Does someone want to add to this? Yes, please.
In talking about identitarianism as well, I like the idea of kind of leaving our identities to the wayside, but when I try to embrace that in practical terms, I think I hear a lot of resistance, like, let's all just together, one love, hippie stuff, nobody wants to hear that. And identitarian claims have been achieved politically, have had more success in terms of achieving something politically. It works to like translate into that box and then get something done. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that.
Okay, don't knock the hippies. I was a major player in the 60s. Living in the quarries, dropping acid, and yet writing books, teaching, going to jail, bailing out students, and so on and so forth, being told how the green card holders should disappear when the police came. Those were the good old days. And so, okay, so let's keep the hippies out of it. Of course, flower children. But, okay, let's go into these 3 now. Citizenship, very important question. I don't believe that the nation state should be jeopardized and should be just thrown away now. I don't think it's a reordering. I think that the civil society phrase that has been picked up by the so-called international civil society, self-selected moral entrepreneurs. There is no contractual connection to anyone except to corporate funding. And these folks use the word civil society because in their undergraduate civics course they learned that anything that was not state, which they equated with government, was civil society. So non-governmental, that's like a negative. NGO is a negative word. So then why not call it civil society? This is a misnomer. Civil society comes with all kinds of accountability. That is, in fact, we do not have anything, any place that we can still think about fighting constitutionally. And so public interest litigations in the hands of international civil society organizations, I'm not against them. I have used Amnesty International. I have used some of these old Human Rights Watch I have less time for, but nonetheless, I've used these kinds of organizations. I've engaged in public interest litigation. I'm not against anything basically except the National Rifle Association. But the thing is that there are some others. But my feeling is, if you are really thinking about the subaltern in any political and specific, not just a literary way, the subaltern can be, in fact, helped to be placed, and as they themselves bring their condition to crisis, into the circuit of the nation state. The subaltern has nothing but a kind of human object being helped, you know, clean water, HIV/AIDS medicine, and so on and so forth. Throw it at them. the subaltern has no other role in terms of world governance. And these self-selected foreign entrepreneurs, who are some of my best friends, they, in fact, are themselves morally outraged, and they're against self-interest. And yet they teach the subaltern nothing but self-interest. They do not think about the subaltern as the subject of human rights, the capital I that can think rights. That's not what it's at. I know, because I'm involved in this kind of stuff. This is not an armchair critique at all. So from that point of view, I would say, given that capitalism also functions, that's what I was saying. I wasn't talking about rebordering, see. I was talking about the fact that these existing borders that are today not only geographical, they are, they have to exist in order for capital which thrives on borderlessness. For me, borderless is not just a good word. It is supposedly a borderless world only according to the false promise of capitalist globalization, whose favorite metaphor is level playing field. So therefore, the idea of borderlessness is medicine and poison. Unless you know how to use it, how to fight for it and against it, it means by itself nothing. So that's why I'm talking about the idea that the nation state has been made completely, I agree with you, completely accountability is gone because I'm saying this very simply because I understand these things only simply. Because the barriers between global capital and national capitals have been removed. This used to be called economic restructuring, which is a better description. Nowadays it's called neoliberalism, and people really don't know what it means, but they use neoliberal and then just move on. And if I ask what is it, they hem and haw. But this idea that the same system of exchange should operate all over the world, to remove the barriers, this has made the state managerial. What does the state manage? It manages the inflow and outflow of global capital. It's as simple as that. There's nothing will contradict this as you get more and more and more detailed and expert and study economics and so on and so forth. You can certainly make this, fine-tune this much further, but nothing is going to contradict this basic fact. And so you go into business administration to get your MBA, this is what you will be taught as the only way to go. Okay? This is, you ask for the description of the World Trade Organization, it helps people do business, period. Okay, so this is, what does that mean? What I just said. So when the state is managerial, constitutional redress, which is why the Supreme Court is in a funny place right now, constitutional redress becomes doubtful because there are many ad hoc ways in which capital controls all of the constitutional everything. And you know, changed in Washington. So to an extent, the state's accountability is gone, and young human rights workers, remember I am in New York City, young human rights workers quite often will simply say that as a given, not knowing that this is a historical fact which was brought about by capital. And the post-colonial situation, their post-colonial studies are very important as to why new nations are quite often corrupt. That's another, I've written a little bit on this too. So I'm not saying that the state, I'm not a statist in other words, but the idea of the size of the state, what there still is as a kind of ruin in the state, that is to say the ruins of the old idea of the social contract and civil society. That is not something that should be destroyed. The idea then of citizenship that can, if you think about it, there are places which try to do away with the worst part of citizenship, which is visa requirements. I'm now talking about the European Union. And that's about to change because, and some of it has already changed, because of this global capital business that I'm talking about. And remember that world trade is, in terms of just numbers, GDP 10 years ago was only 2% of, in the United States, of the finance capital turnover. You know, this inflow, outflow being increased until it is, to quote a book on the housing subprime crisis, Niagara of capital. You know, that's the title of the book. So, it's only 2%. But world trade is also written into this with the futures trading and all that stuff. So world trade is not like somewhere else. It is also part of this. So from this point of view, the idea of making visa, relaxing visa requirements and keeping the civil society structure, that doesn't work because of capital intervention. As I have said before, and I told that joke, and I'll pass on to the second question, the idea of my mother having a US passport, I would say to my mother that you are today the Chakravortis, because my middle name is Chakravorty, which is, by the way, my full professional name is Gayatri Spivak. That middle name, it means chakra is the wheel, right? And vorti or varti, it's a very peculiar suffix because it can mean all different kinds of things, like many suffixes in many languages. So let us say that it was also used as an adjective. I'm not talking about the status of the surname. As an adjective, Raja Chakravarti, which meant that, you know, the royal wheels could go anywhere, right? So if you added that Raja before, Raja, you know, that means king. So the Raja Chakravarti was the king whose wheels could go anywhere. And of course my mother's last name was Chakravarti because that's my father's name, right? So I would say to my mother, you Americans, you know, since she had a passport, are the Chakravartis today. Your wheels go everywhere because you don't have visa regulations. And most people imagine when they invite me abroad, including the Mexicans, that I have a US passport, but my field work is to see the huge difference that comes in the world if you happen, even a privileged person like me, with my kind of a job, he was saying, highest position, university professor at an Ivy League school. There are only 10 of us in the whole Columbia system. I'm the first woman of color ever to have been given that university professorship honor by the president in the 250 plus history of Columbia. Doesn't mean a damn thing carrying an Indian passport. You know what I'm saying? So from that point of view, the privilege is nothing there. So therefore, the borderless world idea, which we talk about really, is the relaxing of this kind of restriction on travel, unconditioned hospitality, but not relinquishing the structure of the state, quite often tied to linguistic proficiencies on the part of the subaltern and so on, because we are nowhere near ready for anything like world governance. The idea of capitalist globalization, the only other idea that there was democratic international pacifist socialism. Where has it gone? Nowhere. Zero. So therefore, that was an idea that we, in our childhood, we thought we were working for as we were growing up, right? That's a world governance idea. It doesn't work because of vanguardism and because of the lack of time for this very training into a will for social justice. So therefore, I think it's much too soon to talk about doing away with the structure of the state. Now, let me tell you this. The word nation that comes before, that's the fuzzy word. State is the good, solid, rational, abstract word. So the thing is that one mobilizes politically and negotiates with the abstract structure of the state, moving sometimes toward fascism, sometimes toward insane nationalism because of an uneducated electorate or epistemically violated children. So the nation part is fuzzy and really terrifying. And I know it. Why? Because I was growing up at a time when it had become good for a little while because of national liberation, right? Medicine and poison. But it's then it becomes something else, right? So but the state part, if we can work at weaning it away from the nationalist fascist circuit, what are we here for? We are teachers, not just in literature, but after all, also in the social sciences. If we can work at that, then we have to keep on working perpetually, because every generation needs this. But that's what I would say. It's a very important, very serious question. When Arendt was writing about the stateless people, she was only talking about the Second World War. If she had, I often think, Arendt was a very smart woman. She lived on my street, on the side drive. She was an incredibly intelligent person. But the problem, we all have problems. And so when I criticize Arendt in this way, I'm just thinking, my God, what problems must I have? Because I can't look around my corner if someone as smart as she had this one. I mean, I don't know if you've read her book on violence, undoubtedly you have. How incredibly racist that book is against the African Americans. And so, to an extent, what it does there is that talking only so critically about her own place, Europe, if she had thought about the colonized world, then I think she would have come to superb conclusions which would have enriched what she was saying, and not just the stateless population that had been generated by the Second World War. So that's how I would answer. It's a very important question. And we who are so critical of the states we inhabit, nonetheless have to think about that medicine poison argument and not throw away the electoral sanctions behind citizenship tied to the civil society of a state, even as we try mightily to get around nationalism, fascism, and even as we think of borderlessness in terms of the unconditional hospitality of relaxing, the possibility of being able to relax visa restrictions. But if that happens, it would have to be accompanied by the disappearance of the difference in foreign exchanges. And globalist, capitalist globalization is not going to stand for it, because that's finance capital. So that's my long answer to a very, very significant question. As for performative, going to perfection, going towards performance. See, generally speaking, because performative is a word, this is the problem with all words, that they carry the historical burdens on their shoulder. And so, and making a new word is useless, because people quite often think that by using the new word, somehow they've changed their minds and they're into new politics, etc. So, I mean, I'm not against making new words. I mean, sometimes these new words are fantastic, and it's okay. Like news, for example, I quite like that. We fought for that. But, but nonetheless, they don't solve a problem, because, you know, David Rockefeller says Ms., and some poor person who's getting his balls shot away at some kind of torture place says Mrs. So how are you going to choose? Therefore, these words don't do everything. But performative and performance, both of them carry that word, perform. So that quite often they're confused. In fact, that was poor Judy's problem. Although Judith Butler, writing about gender trouble, she had herself actually not followed. She used the word performative in a way that was really had nothing to do with Austen, and it was a mistake to have used that word. But that's as it may be. But it's quite often taken to mean simply that you acted out, and so on. And that was also wrong. That's why she wrote Bodies That Matter. So, at any rate, therefore, let's try to think about that definition. Okay, that words do something. You know, I mean, the word that's always I'm not going to use the example Austin used because it's a gender and race example, but I will use, it's only Abrahamic and it's heteronormative, but I will use a word that is also among Austin's examples, which is I promise. The word promise, as we know, is a performative word because it's not dependent upon the promise being performed. You say, I promise that you promise. The word does the promise. So when it's evidentiary, swearing, etc., that's not the promise. That's very different. There's a difference between testimony and evidence and so on and so forth, and a promise. In the English language, the word promise is a performative. So that in first person singular, and so this particular characteristic of a word, I've used a general word, but this particular characteristic of a word can only, and it can even go to gestures, can only function if a whole structure of convention is in existence. For example, this gesture does blasphemy. No Hindu puts her foot on a book because that is a complete insult to the goddess of learning. I will never be able to get any kind of education at all because I've just done that. So it can only work through if a certain kind of convention exists, then it can work, right? So the entire caste system, for example, the last name does the work. But that's only because our stupefying convention exists. It seems completely irrational to people, like I was just having this conversation. The movie said, "Keep understanding that that's a performance." So what I was talking about when I say performative, I expand this. I don't stay within the strict outline, and I say that the performative signifies, in my expanded sense, the set of cultural expectations and so on, which are taken to be human nature by the people within the culture. So that you cannot say this is cultural. When people can say this stuff is cultural, then it's not a performative anymore. So the thing is that this stuff is like, as I was saying, it's like the software in a computer for it to work. So it's that performative, which we must not think in terms of performance, but rather as an expansion of the Austinian notion of the performative, which relies on the existence of absolutely shared, undeclared conventions, which is culture. That's the performative. I could name you quite a few, but I'm not going to, because then we're going to discuss those to make this concrete, because there's nothing more interesting than waste time talking about cultural, performative things, especially since, you know, you become self-conscious. If you become self-conscious about them, you're not talking about them at all. So let's keep that aside. When that is gone, that structure of conventions, then you, on the other hand, historically, quite often this happens because, either because a different civil society has been chosen in terms of move into another place for looking for justice for oneself or one's children under capitalism. That's the biggest model now, and most especially these days also into the area, metropolitan area of the former colonial masters. And that's a very fine way of undoing the existing performative. And it happens haphazardly, you know, I mean, that example, mother thinks on her, daughter thinks reproductive rights, that's a performative change which happens haphazardly. But in choosing another civil society. So when this happens, then it is felt, especially by the older generation, to be happening. And generationally, this kind of changes in a haphazard way. But one of the claims that in a more contemporary situation that we have learned to make, rather than just have this happen haphazardly, so that the hyphenation simply indicates the move into a new performative, slowly, generationally. The idea has been to keep the historical, which is now becoming historical as the performative is shifting, to bring it into an area of intellectual, imaginative, and physical performance. So you have the curricula, I'm making it very broad here, of course there are details, intellectual. You have the imaginative, all kinds those huge, beautiful sand dreaming arrangements by the Maori and the Australian Aborigines, imaginative. And not just reproducing them anthropologically, but playing with them, changing them. Others taking them also, imaginative. And physical, the question I'm often asked, do you do yoga? No. But, I'm Indian. In the Indian context, first of all, it's been sold abroad. Second of all, it's a good thing, sure, but I have such deep resistance to the fact that the bigots went into this in my own childhood. There are other ways, and there's nothing particularly special about it. Yoga is wonderful, but there are other ways of doing things. That physical stuff, taekwondo, whatever. The Americans are very into it. So there's nothing wrong with that. But nonetheless, so you bring it into performance in every way, and that's good. That's good. There's nothing, not only is it good, it is completely supportable. That's the Mexican studies stuff. And so what happens when that happens is that it begins to enter one way or the other. And in places, some places more, some places less. Okay? You live in New York, you see this happening in a very interesting way in terms of ethnic and cultural restaurant culture, as to how the performance aspect, fusion, etc., those are words describing what I'm talking about, how it gets into this general performative. I'm going to give you an example which is not correct. Like most examples, it's incorrect, but you get a sense. I'm coming to the airport. The car service person is from Israel, and he asks me, because I was dressed for the airport in trousers and so on, so he asks me, what kind of accent am I hearing? And so I said to him, it's an Indian accent. I was very happy that he did not say, as other kinds of people invariably say, no, that's not an Indian accent, because they only associate an Indian accent with what was mocked by people like Peter Sellers. This is a very solid university colonial Indian accent. No British person would think of it as a British accent. And no one. So therefore, some people say to me, I wasn't educated in Britain at all. It's a good, solid university accent in English, colonial accent. Dr. Chatterjee and I both share this one. So it's an Indian accent. But he immediately asked me, what does handy mean? And so he spells it H-A-A-N-D-I. Okay, so it's an Indian language word. And I said there are 23 languages in India, but I know what you're talking about. It means a cooking pot. But you see, this is a bad example because it's self-conscious. But on the other hand, you know what I'm talking about. So slowly, food is a beautiful example because there's not much to be fought over there. Okay, except of course, the Indian mutiny, the cartridges with lard and so on and so forth, and so they rose. But everything has an exception. So at any rate, so this kind of entering into the performative of the general culture, the reason why we get this best in the African American situation in the United States is because nothing, not even indentured labor, and my folks Indians have been in indentured labor for many centuries. Nothing compares to the brutality of chattel slavery. So the difference between the Middle Passage and the American state, the US state, was so wide that in fact it was from people like Frederick Douglass and Du Bois and so on and so forth that we began to get the idea of the lost African performative becoming almost traded for. I mean, if you look at the first version of Frederick Douglass's autobiography, you see this so strongly, such a smart man, getting transformed into a general performative, because of course these people also realized that they themselves, Mary Prince, all of those, they presented a very high level of intellectual achievement, not to mention physical achievement. So to that extent, that's how it enters into the general performative. But the question about how to distinguish it from identitarianism, that's a hard one, because in general, the entry into the general performative is willy-nilly. If it is going to enter the general performative, it's not going to be that self-conscious. You know, if somebody, I mean, again, this is a bad example. If somebody tells you that punch, that drink, you know, means 5 in Hindi, because that was the only way in which the white masters could communicate to their servants in India, and since when all of the liquor was used up and there was some left in the bottom of the bottles, put them all together. So put the punch together, you know, put the 5 of those together. That's how the name came, right? That you call fruit punch or punch bowl, etc., etc. So that is unself-conscious to an extent. I mean, it's not just through long words, but you know, I can't find good examples, but it is unself-conscious. Therefore, when the people in the watershed intellectuals who actually talk about this, quite often there will be some kind of identity stuff. In general, I have, however, found that in the big ones, there is also a desire to go toward the general, not just identity. But this is not always true. That fight has to be fought, Miranda, separately, it seems to me. It doesn't come packaged with, I'm looking for where I took since I stamped on the damn thing. See, in Kankla, there we go. That package, that doesn't come packaged with the shift. So we have to think about fighting identitarianism in another way. Let me say, without going into much detail right now, especially since I'm not finding the third question, let me say that in the idea of national liberation, identitarianism is very strong. Yeah, and in fact, people like Gandhi, Tagore, etc., they used Orientalism in order to get national liberation. What my friend Abdul Said would call Orientalism. Now, therefore, when we post-colonials fight identitarianism, or when we, in a situation like the United States, fight identitarianism, internal stuff, what we say generally is, in order, and here now is an activist speaking, in order to fight them, since they have decided that you are completely determined by your background, history, and culture, you have to, as a weapon, be identitarians. But if you don't keep in mind right from the start that it's only their description, see, they are free to study anything, be unmarked, normal, and yet they are the identity people, they are the racist identity people, but as a result of this, they have talked about you as being culturally determined. If right from the start you don't realize that the way to become better than they are when you win is to forget this. You see, you just have to keep insisting this. Keep this as a weapon because this is what they fight with. But it's not something that is true. It is not something that is true. history moves, tradition makes you prisoners. And there are many, many examples that one can garner. The one example that I will give and then pass on to the third question is the example that I was given at the, for some reason, you know, I have never had a philosophy course in either undergraduate or graduate school. I don't know how to philosophize. I'm interested in philosophy, and I've studied philosophy on my own a good deal. For some reason, the UNESCO decided, I found it, UNESCO decided that I was a world philosopher. That's not nonsense. But on the other hand, I accept everything because then I can go and say these awful things. So, you know, I went to this place in Palermo, and they are saying to me, they're playing nice music, all kinds of music. So I said, look, you know, I like European classical music. Sorry, you don't like it, but I do like it. Mind you, I have a degree in performance, North Indian classical vocals, so it's not like I don't know any Indian music. But at any rate, so I'm saying to them, well, why? It's just another kind of music. So why don't you ever play any nice European classical music? And so the guy or the woman actually says to me, you know, that's just historical. I mean, we play traditional music. It's just a disgusting kind of thing, right? So to an extent, that fight has to be fought in other ways, on other fronts. Because this thing, the ones who are actually trying to do this, the gender performative, they really have, it's, I think, wrong to expect from them that they should suddenly become, you know, like philosophers like Edward Said quoting Hugo's and Victor saying, the person to whom all countries are foreign is the really free person, etc. I believe that, but on the other hand, you can't really sell that to people who are fighting for this shift. Okay. Now, as for identity, leaving our, no, you cannot leave your identity. I'm talking about identitarianism. Not only can you not leave your identity, you don't know what your identity is, sorry. It's one of those things like sleeping to Kokuchi or sleeping tied to the back of a tiger. You know, if you knew, it's for other people to think about that one. On the other hand, the other people don't have enough tools because they're not inside you. You know, just as you can't touch your appendix, it's your appendix nonetheless. Identity is a bit like that. So you have to, how would you be dead if you think you don't have an identity? Now, the thing is, you just with your two hands, how much resistance you can produce. The idea is to resist basing rational behavior on thinking that identity is a good criterion. Things like feminism, for example, hit by the other side. Males who don't have to say anything about identity. You know, think about the fact that Kant and Mary Wollstonecraft, who are contemporaries, Kant lived to be 80, told us many things that I'm still working with, many of us are still working with. Mary Wollstonecraft died at 38 in childbirth. Kant could not have died in childbirth. So to an extent, this kind of thing, the feminine identity, that kind of stuff, because of brutal battering from the other side, which, I mean, Bella Abzug called us a consensus breaker because we were speaking on the UN floor about Bangladesh, etc., saying don't just keep making abortion legal, which we were supporting 100%. Don't just keep that, also add forced contraception, etc., forced sterilization, there we go, pharmaceutical dumping. And we were called consensus breakers. So to an extent, the idea of proceeding only from your, whatever your identity is, which you cannot know fully, it threw into identitarianism and making it the ground for legal political action. That's identitarianism. And then also to feel that you can be, because you are in this, whatever culture it is, here there is no distinction. You can innovate. Everybody else is determined by the other culture. That is identitarianism, and it's deeply, deeply immoral. It's criminal against human beings to think that only your group. I hear many, many times, but this can't be translated into English. Sure enough, it can't. But on the other hand, there are many things in English which can't be translated into my language. There's nothing, as my mother said to me, English is also a mother tongue. This idea of basing things on identity because you had your butt kicked in historically, this is identitarianism. Now, even this, the critique is not all that good, because I work with my students, my teachers in Birbhum. They millennially have been, I mean, colonialism is nothing, it was day before yesterday, but they have been millennially cognitively damaged by us, by the caste Hindus, right? They've been bred up for manual labor, punished for intellectual labor, because obedience is required, and oppressed in many other ways, but this was the epistemic violence. Now these people, the real problem, and that's also a definition of subalternity, they think, and I know what I'm talking about, this has been 25 years in very close contact, they think that is normal. The subaltern thinks subalternity is normal. That's why when people come up to me and say, I'm a subaltern, I'm speaking, I say, go boil your head. You haven't seen what subalternity is. The real wretchedness of subalternity is this epistemic acceptance that this is what the world is like. So, therefore, it's not with fighting identitarianism that you begin, because there isn't any. So, I mean, what there is this kind of wretchedness. There this becomes poison. So you go in, and you know, when I was working for the Texas Farm Workers Union, paralegal, there was one lawyer working with us, Lee Taylor, and we had really talked to these wonderful workers, and Maria was going to depose in the State House in English. We were incredibly happy at all. And as she begins, she uses by mistake, we had never corrected her because we were happy that she was doing this, the word ladies, which is of course feministically not politically correct. There was some stupid woman from Washington, NOW, and she actually begins to correct Maria at that point. That's really medicine become poison, that she shouldn't use the word ladies. And we are ready to take her to the cleaners. Luckily, the lawyer person who was there, she kind of managed to do damage control, and so all went well. But at the end of the whole session, this woman, let's call her Sandra Johnson, she comes forward and gives me a card, which card bearing feminist. It's Sandra Johnson feminist. Now, the thing is that I believe say ladies, but it's a bad idea. But on the other hand, that little medicinal moment becomes poison if you begin to use it in that situation. That doesn't mean that you won't talk to Maria later at some point, talking about what is implicit, you know, in that use of the word ladies, why it is the same as that old joke about the woman saying, about the man saying, don't use language, there are cunts present, right? It's the same kind of thing. So you talk about all that, but you do not do it when this deposition is going on. In the same way, you do not critique identitarianism in certain kinds of situations, with the watershed intellectuals, with the subaltern. But one thing I will say, this voting bloc approach, Melissa Williams in Canada, you know, to politics in the name of good identity politics is a joke. It breaks democracy. It's useful when the wrong voting bloc, quote unquote, but that is completely situational. You see, I'm not speaking against it completely because you speak against nothing. Because that means that you don't do anything. So this medicine poison thing is a very strong thing. But one must know, sitting in a room discussing, answering questions, that that is a wrong thing. The idea of breaking the democratic electorate into the black vote, the women's vote, the Puerto Rican vote, the Hispanic vote, etc. So that's my thing about identity. I mean, you cannot get around identity. And there is no denying that if I could talk to you in Bengali, I would feel much better But I can't take that as my starting point for political action, that I will only work with people to whom I can speak in Bengali or Spanish or Catalan or whatever. You know what I mean? No. So this idea of identity, it is because we cannot get around it. We must welcome it. We must live in it. We must enjoy it, especially as you grow close to death. You must enjoy it. You must be at home in your body. And that thing, be comfortable in your language. That thing, there must not become something from which political and intellectual action is declared because it will want to become that. So you're absolutely correct. You cannot, but you must produce thought through resistance, not just a complete letting go. You know what I mean? And I could tell you very, very much more about how this living in the United States for so long has, in fact, changed my identity for the better, in my own estimation, although I can only speak about my stereotyping myself. This is a very politically incorrect thing to say. But, you know, I'm not going to say anything, because then we'll get into another discussion. Even if you ask me that question, I won't answer. But I give a little clue with the request not to cookies. So, more. I've answered 3. Is there any more time? Have I used up? How long? How long have I got?
1 more.
Yeah, but
And you have
how
to
long
leave.
is this? How long is this session?
We have to 1:45.
1.5, you sure?
Okay. So I have a question about teaching, and you have some advice or thoughts for my concern as a teacher. But I want to start by telling 2 quick stories to let you know where I'm coming from. So about 2 years ago, when Barack Obama was giving his address to school children, the principal at my daughter's elementary school decided not to let the children watch the speech, except for certain teachers who sent their children to the cafeteria and suspended their teaching activities to go and listen to the speech. So my neighbors know that I'm an activist and called me on the phone complaining and screaming and how can this happen and so on. But you have to go talk to him. So I went to see the principal at my daughter's elementary school and I said, listen, sir, my daughter's father is African and I'm American, and she identifies with Barack Obama, and she watched the whole election go on, and the fact that you censor his words in the school setting sends a message to my daughter that I find difficult to accept. And we had an hour-long discussion, a very vigorous discussion about the epistemic violence that happens when you censor a president's speech.
Principal actually used that phrase?
I did not use it, but this is what it was, right? And so you know what happens? He moved to Ohio, and now we have a new principal. But I said that we just can't work like this. We can't live like this. We can't do things like this. It sends the wrong message to children. Well, another thing, just to give you an idea of the kind of tension that we have around here. After Gabby was shot, I was listening to Ian Masters, who has this show called Background Briefing, and he had 2 investigative journalists from around here talking about how vigilantes shoot undocumented immigrants who are coming across the border, and this kind of fear and violence that's around. So as a teacher on campus at the University of Arizona, I teach African literature and cinema, and I worry that I censor myself. I worry that this fear is affecting how I also approach questions of identity or violence or politics or justice. And I'm sincerely devoted and interested in educating the electorate to have a will for social justice for all, but it's a really tricky environment to work in. Do you have any advice for us as teachers?
I think you should do what you feel is right. I have absolutely no advice for anybody in any situation that I don't know well. So therefore, if you feel this, fine. But I will say, and because also one teaches better if one is teaching out of convictions, rather than being told by someone else to do something which is correct. So the conviction conviction must be generated through exchange with other people's ideas. So I'm not interested really in advising, in a little short conversation, people who are involved in situations. I will say some things, which is that to claim an interest in an educated electorate in this will for social justice, because that's what I was saying yesterday, or epistemic violence, because I was saying that today, that's not a good idea. Because these formulaic expressions then simply become descriptions of what one has always done. And I think that's a problem. Because if you just take over the vocabulary from someone else, all the value in whatever I would say to change minds is undermined. This is what happened with the damn phrase strategic use of essentialism, which I should never have used, or planetarity, which I should never have used. But one can't just silence oneself. It's so, therefore, my real request is that one must not dress what one has already been doing. I mean, when I started working on Derrida, the number of people who told me that they were already doing what Derrida was doing, I cannot count. So many people told me. So I would like to say, take a moratorium on that one. Whenever you feel that you are doing exactly what you read or hear from or in someone you kind of like, stop yourself and say, no, I'm wrong, because that's the way one actually dilutes whatever one is reading, so that one begins to feel good about oneself. Okay, so that one I can say. I can't give advice about how to teach. And I can say another one, which is, because that rolls off the tongue, educating the electorate for will to social justice. It isn't something that you can just say, I do. It's not so easy. If I were going to talk about it, I would say that in 25 years, and in 50 years, and 45 years, those are the years of my teaching, I have not succeeded. So therefore, the idea that you can just simply say it because you like the phrase, forget that one. And so the idea of stories, and I like telling stories myself, the identity stories, they will climb up. I mean, what stories will I tell? It depends on what I want to say. I choose, right? That, first time I go back with a white husband at my home, Calcutta Club, I cannot enter because I'm Indian. He can because he's white. So what does it prove? It proves that the colonizers were dogs. So but what does it benefit? It just benefits, it shows how I've suffered. I haven't suffered. What did I say? I haven't suffered at all. So do you choose to call the glass half full or half empty? So to an extent, yes, these stories are awful, but they do not, in fact, if I say anything about resisting identity in the face of such stories, I would be cruel, I would not be sympathetic, I don't know the situation. Of course I don't know the situation, that's where I began. Teach what you feel like teaching. That's not my problem. But it's out of your own convictions. But my real problem is with younger folks who are not frozen into these things, to change the direction of their desires so that the conviction, I don't even change their minds. Who can change minds? I can't change convictions. But when you are teaching a class in a rough and ready way, you begin to get a sense, not in a psychoanalytic way, you can't know desires, like you can't know identity. But in a rough and ready way, in a group way, you begin to see the direction of the desires as you're teaching. That's teaching. So it's very hard, and that's what you try to rearrange it, rearrange it. And I don't succeed. The one person with whom I succeeded was shot by the FBI, William Sampson, one of the Greens qualified. And so, to an extent, let's not. Nobody I know ever says that they're not good teachers. I am not a good teacher. It's okay, I'm a very sincere teacher. I can teach self-selected groups. There are certain kinds of students who can learn from me. But the whole teaching business, it cannot be based on this kind of justification. And also, I will tell you one story about Gandhi, that Harsh Mandar, when he resigned from the Indian administrative service in disgust because of the genocide of the Muslims, he said this story that God knows Gandhi, in spite of his Hindu-Muslim amity, etc., he was in fact very much dyed-in-the-wool Hindu. But there came a Hindu guy to Gandhi saying that the Muslims had killed his only son. And Gandhi said, look, the only way to deal with this for you is to take into your heart a Muslim child killed by the Hindus and bring him or her up as a Muslim. That last part is not a bad thing to remember. So what stories will you tell? There will be stories on one side, there will be stories on the other side. So telling stories is good. But on the other hand, as I was saying to you, they don't really, in the long run, go toward this kind of general teaching principles. How do I say that? I say that because these people that I teach in the, in the unis in India, they have also been denied not only the right, but the capacity through this cognitive crime, cognitive damage, millennial cognitive damage, the right to abstraction. The right to abstraction, the capacity to analyze, to abstract, etc. The things that we, who are super educated, can easily not. So therefore, that's why when we were talking about the nation state, I do not go with this critique of governmentality and biopower. That's everybody's battle now. Because this is also medicine and poison. When you work with people who have never had the slightest access to any of these citizenship rights in the world's largest democracy, in a constitution written by a fantastic Fabian socialist, you know very well that it is a privilege of the elite like Foucault or Chatterjee to simply knock governmentality. Gramsci knew that the state was medicine. And in the same way, biopower. When there is no healthcare, and there is the nationalized national health service in India. Do you know that? I can get free medicine. Who knows it? No one. Because there's also up top this very expensive for the Indians, but cheap for the foreigners, wonderful medical stuff, so that Americans are going and getting medical stuff, medical help in India. Nobody knows, but how is it? Why do the rural folks, why can't they use it? Because they can't read. So they can't look at the medicine and see if it's the correct medicine, if it's past the sell-by date. I can. So I get my antibiotics, everything. And even the doctor in the rural area said, shall I write you another prescription? I say, why? If people prefer to go to the store. I say, why? There's a national health service. I'm Indian. No, this prescription is fine. So to an extent, to say to such people, critique of biopower, it's a joke. So to an extent, you have to see this medicine poison business also there. So that would be my idea about teaching. And the last thing about teaching that I will say, which will leave us 5 minutes, is when I got my job, I've been teaching for money since 1959. But I got my job at the Modern Language Association meeting in 1964. And so I became an assistant professor in 1965. And so I was 22 in 1964, right? I was 3 years out of India. I told this story to two women yesterday. And so I was worried, because as I told you folks how little French and German I know, but what the preparation was. And so I was going to teach a graduate course on Rilke, Baudelaire, and Mallarmé. And I was going into, I had interviewed well, and Ralph Friedman was leaving, so I was inheriting his course. I was 22 then, and I was 23 years old. So I went to this monk. Remember, I'm not a believer, I say I'm an atheist, but polytheism, atheism is nothing. What I don't really believe in, because even atheisms are accommodated within Hindu heteropraxy. They're called karmakandis, Nastic karmakandis, they're Hindus. But what I don't believe in, which is a real killer for a Hindu, I don't believe in the immortality of the soul. I don't believe in the existence of the soul. I don't believe in the Atman. So, and this monk knew that, but he was himself a Vedantist. So, a Vedantist, not today's kind of Vedantist for sale, but a real intellectual without this is about as close as you can get to an atheist. And it's like, Buddhist nuns. My mother would say to me that I'm so idealistic. They don't need to believe in God. But anyway, so I went to him. He was my friend. He was in his 60s. I was 22. He knew I didn't believe in anything. So I said to him, look, I'm very scared. I don't know what to do. I can't, I'm just 3 years out of India. And I'm going to be an assistant professor. And I'm going to teach all these white kids. And I'm going to teach, Malahme and Yeats and so on. So what am I going to do? So he said to me, thinking of a kind of domestic service profession, which luckily doesn't exist anymore, but he was in his 60s in 1964. He said to me, Gayatri, you are teaching for money. Remember, you're your servant, you're a student's servant. Remember that you're a student's servant, you will never be free. The moment you start thinking you're a guru, you've had it. You have had it. And guru for us, of course, is not just a minor pejorative English word. It's a very big word, right? So, therefore, that particular idea, I'm terrified to teach. But this notion, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a good teacher, but this idea that you are your student's servant, and this other idea of teasing out desire and trying to shift rather than mind change, identity, etc. These two have lasted me a long time, but what can I say? I've never run a teaching class, so therefore, outsiders certainly don't think that these are any good. So therefore, at some point, talk to a student of mine, not someone who's just had one course, but someone who's walked the walk with me, and see if I know what I'm talking about. That's the last thing, 2 minutes. So unless you have like a burning question, which by the way I was asked here, I can take up to this, in that class by Michael Dennis Brown, who's a poet, who's my student. James Tate was my student. I taught him poetry. Imagine that. Robert Grenier, all of these wonderful language poets and so on. They were all in my poetry class at Iowa. I taught Charles Oakson, and at any rate, and others. Anyway, so he asked the first class, okay, who was sitting there. Yeah, and most of the students are older than I. 23, it's a graduate class. So yeah, puts up their hand, yes. How old are you? Hey. And I said, it's an interesting question. And then we passed on. So now, 1:45. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for having us.
No, thank you.
Thank you all.
I just want to say one thing, and it's the idea of the cooperative border project, and we've really been talking about having also a decent conference in which we can really make this connection with the Africa project and the Susan Nogales corridor, and this is something that we're going to be working on that with the conference center and other people in the university, but it's something that is emerging out of the street, really, and I just want to share that with